Welcome to the Parawareness podcast, and this, I guess, is going to be episode 1. So today, I'm going to be interviewing a man named Kevin, and he is a very busy man in the communities of targeted individuals. And of course, he and I have conversations in our own spaces where we are realizing some things about these targeted individual groups. So anyway, Kevin, welcome to the show. Thank you for all you do. I know you work your butt off. And but if you want, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you started PositiveTI or were led to that as the start of that subreddit.
Okay, cool. Thank you for having me on, and especially with the first one here. So, all right. So my full-blown 24/7 targeting, started July 28th of 2023, and up until that point, I had been dealing with directed energy and hearing voices and, all the things, all the signs and symptoms that make up being a targeted individual for years, on and off. Sometimes they'd come for like a week and then leave, and then come for another few days and then leave. And my girlfriend was going through this as well. And this was during a very tumultuous time in my life. There was a lot of, addiction problems and alcoholism and a lot of traumatic stuff going on, which always seems to be a precursor to this sort of thing occurring in somebody's life. Not all the time, but it's definitely prevalent. There's some sort of somebody passed away, there's a divorce going on, there's a significant amount of loss, there's drug abuse, there's a lot of suffering. Now sometimes this happens just from deeper states of meditation, I've come to find out. So on the night of July 28th, 2023, I had always blown it off in my mind up until that point as being some sort of psychosis. This is, my brain just playing tricks on me. And right. Then it was shown to me that night in a way that, and that's that moment, where your brain switches over from, believing or thinking to knowing, now you know that what is occurring is not a process of your own mind, that it originates external to your mind. And this is happening outside of you, and it's, coming from elsewhere, and that's a game changer. But it was at that moment that it began 24/7, and now mind you, I had made a decision to turn my life around at that point. My girlfriend, we found out that she was pregnant, and I said, man, we got to stop this lifestyle, this nonsense, the activities that we were involved in. So I had actually checked myself into a rehab in Philadelphia, Northeast Philadelphia, called Self-Help. And it was, my first night in that rehab. And I had already gone through detox at Jefferson University Hospital. So I was, clean and sober, still
right.
reeling with the repercussions of my lifestyle and the guilt and the shame and all that. And everything was silent with the voices. And then all of a sudden, one of the voices came back and it said, "Are you ready, Kevin?" And I remember laying in my bed and I was like, what the heck? Like, are you ready? And then all of a sudden, like, boom, like my entire room turned into a planetarium of just stars and like planets and geometrical patterns and shapes and all kinds of faces, alien faces and hockey mask faces and human faces, and then mountaintops and ranges. And I remember just being in awe, like, whoa, and it was weird how it occurred. It was whether my eyes were closed or my eyes were shut, I could still see it. Now, if my eyes were open, it would overlay everything. But if my eyes were shut, I could still see it, almost like an LSD trip,
Right.
And then the voices started going. And from that moment forward, the voices very procedurally and sequentially went through what cognitive behavior therapy would call like fear exposure therapy, meaning it exposed me to, over the course of the next few months, my fears, my fears about other people's opinions, the fears about myself. And it would do this by speaking to my ego, and it would exaggerate it. It would speak to my hubris. It would blow it up. Boom, you say all these very grandiose things, and then it would just smash it. It would just suffocate it and stomp on it. How stupid are you for believing us? Like these kind of this up and down, up and down, up and down. And it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible because it'll say these things, and mind you, at that, and it happens. This is a very common thread, right? So, it happens at a point in people's lives where they're very vulnerable and susceptible to wanting to get out of that lifestyle. So they're saying things like, "You're a rock star. You're going to be a rock star. How much money do you want? Like all these, we're going to pick you up in a limo when you're done with the rehab." It's crazy to some of the stuff they say.
No
and you're in
doubt,
such a vulnerable and susceptible state that you're buying into it. You're like, "Oh my God, thank God, all my dreams have." And in extraordinary circumstance, your mind is thinking must have an extraordinary outcome. You're being spoken to telepathically, first of all. So that in itself is like, whoa, like something extraordinary is happening here. I must be an extraordinary person, right?
Right.
So you're buying into this. You're buying into it. And then, boom, you can't honestly believe that, do you? Oh, my God, this guy is dumber than a box of rocks. And you're like, oh, you sons of, oh, my God, just do the anger, right? So you're being fluctuated between these extreme emotions of, grandiosity and just anger and rage and bitterness and animosity. And then they play nice. We just needed to do that to get you ready for what's coming. The limousine's going to be there too.
Yes.
And then you buy into it again. And then and you go through this. And I went through it for months and months and months, up and down, back and forth, and that's what it does. It tears your mind in half. And the whole time, right? So now you start going into like, who the hell am I speaking to? Who is this? Like now they do it and they get you so angry. So in the angry state, you're like, you effing demons, you're demons. And then they start being nice and you're like, oh, angels. Oh, I'm dealing with it, So, and that's how this thing goes.
They also feed in to whatever you think. They'll go, oh, you said demons? Yes, you can have some demons if you want them. And then of course later they'll apologize after they get done torturing you. But if you bring something up or live in a certain zone, as far as like if you're watching a lot of horror movies or whatever, it's that whole like garbage in, garbage out kind of thing. Like it really feels sometimes to me like, and I think you probably had this too, that whatever you are focusing on, it will use that, right?
Right. Yeah, well, it will use whatever is relevant to you to have an association with your psyche, right? And so if I'm thinking, if even if I'm reading a news article, right, or I'm reading a Reddit post and somebody's talking about the nefarious activity that happens at Lockheed Martin, right? Lockheed Martin Skunk Works or something like that. Yeah. All of a sudden the voices will be like, it's Lockheed Martin, Kevin. They're, and they'll start taking credit because now you have some sort of like, you're whatever it is that you give credibility towards, it'll assume that role to have credibility. Is a good way to put it. Okay. So depending on your upbringing, right? So I was raised Christian. So the concept of God and Satan and demons and angels and heaven and hell and these extreme states of Christianity, that's what was, played into. And I remember like, and you're getting hit with like this very just negative energy a lot of the times, that's just, it's regurgitating anger and it's regurgitating hate and disgust and, and opposition. And I remember like praying in my mind, like Jesus, see, and they're just laughing. Like it can be very sinister and very dark in those moments. And it really brings about a state of helplessness and hopelessness because, this is your go-to, this is your spiritual subjective go-to is, Jesus Christ and God. Right. And when they just laugh at it and mock it and tell you how stupid you are for even bringing up that name, because you read all these articles about how even like extraterrestrials, you read like stories about how extraterrestrials will all of a sudden release somebody that they've, that they've kidnapped or whatever if they start mentioning Jesus's name. So, and it's like, and then you go that route, and whatever this thing is, it just mocks you.
Yeah.
It'll, and then I've read stories about targeted individuals who the voices will tell them, start going to church. We need you to go to church and get very involved. So they say, okay. And they go to church, and then they just get tortured. I mean, I've read a lot of stories like that. They just get tortured and called stupid for following through with a direct order. So it's like you have this thing that, and this is how a lot of it goes. You have this thing that is torturing the hell out of you and playing this good cop, bad cop role, and you're doing everything in your power to alleviate the pain and the torture, right? Even going as far as to go back to church, as to go and, just do all kinds of things. I know a guy that, and I won't bring up his name, but the voices were telling him, we want you to go to Burger King and eat a Whopper. And he said, okay. So he went to Burger King and ate a Whopper, and they were like, you're an idiot. Like, and then they just mock him for doing that very thing. So it's like, they don't want to be trusted. All right. They make that very clear from the gate. They do certain things that you'll follow through with a direct order. And then as soon as you follow through with that direct order, they just trash you for it. Right. So you learn very quickly, never follow through with anything that they say. And I have spoken to people that have gone for years across the country doing what they tell them to do. And sometimes crazy stuff happens. Sometimes really crazy, wild, bizarre stuff happens, but, and I'm sure that that's a setup by them, but you need to learn from day one. Do not listen to what they say. Actually, let me stop right there. Yeah. I only listen to what they say for as long as absolutely necessary is the best way to put that, but never do what they tell you to do. Never, ever, ever do what the voices tell you to do. And if you do a quick Google search, just put in 3 words, hearing voices, murder. Just put those 3 words into a Google search engine and tell me when your thumb or your finger gets tired from hitting the refresh button at the bottom of the page, or would you like to see more searches? It just goes on and on. Mother killing children, children killing parents.
And that's not even counting. That's not even counting if you do that same search and you put suicide instead of murder.
Right. Just murder.
You know what I mean?
I did it one day just for kicks and giggles. And I got, after about, I want to say 2 dozen of that, all just, it gets crazy. All right. So back to what happened right now, mind you, while this was going on for about the first 6 months of this going, this up and down, back and forth extremes, right? I started pushing through it. I started pushing through that cycle of torment, and your brain is torn constantly between yes and no. It's as if it's as if you can picture yourself split right down the middle, and this side is yes and this side is no. It's boom, boom, back and forth. And you're thinking about yourself during a lot of this and your self-perception. And it's like, am I smart? Am I stupid? Am I fat? Am I skinny? Am I black? Am I white? Am I right? Am I wrong? Am I, is it yes or no? Is it this? Is this good or is this evil? Am I, back and forth, all these extreme things that go back and forth. And I noticed that once I found myself in the middle and I began to say to myself, I don't know. That was the beginning right there. That was the beginning of me being able to stop that torment, that pull back and forth, was me being able to humble myself and say, I don't know. Once I was able to say to myself, I don't know who I am. I don't know what the hell this is. I don't know who I am in relation to this. I don't know who I am in relation to the world. I don't know how to view myself. I don't know how other people really view me. I think they view me pretty much as a scumbag, but I don't really know how they view me. I don't know how to view myself in relation to my God and to the universe. I don't know how to, I don't know. And then that, and then I was able to start saying maybe. And then I was able to start saying perhaps. And then I was able to start saying we'll see. And then all these kind of things where you meet yourself in the middle, not black or white, but gray, not smart, not the smartest guy in the room, but I'm not the dumbest guy in the room. I'm not, all these things. You find yourself in the middle, and then the future and the past. I'm always reflecting on the past, which is the direct cause of my regret and my worry and my shame and my humiliation. And all my embarrassment in life, all that bull crap that I had to leave behind. Or I'm focusing on the future. Who do I want to be? And that's a direct cause of all my worry and my anxiety and my stress. And very rarely was I right here in the present moment, And once you're able to find yourself in the present moment of I'm willing to learn about myself because I don't really know a whole lot, then you can move forward. So once I was able to do that, right? But I had to get through the bullshit first. Then I was able to start really doing some work. And then once you do that, the voices, they stop. They stop doing that and they move on to the next thing. But that's the first thing, is torture the shit out of you. That's the first phase. They're going to torture the shit out of you with any role that you're willing to assign to them. They will play that role. Oh, you want us to be the CIA? We can be the CIA. You want us to be demons? We'll be demons. You want, basically, whatever it is that you think they are, they will play that role. And they'll play the opposite of that role to let you know how much of an idiot you are for thinking that they're that role. So you got to move past that and be willing to say, I don't know what the hell they are. I don't know. It's called phenomena for a reason.
Right.
and then it starts taking on a different course of action, you know. Then it starts getting into some really weird stuff, like really strange stuff, you know, and it was almost like I had kind of not, you know, not, I don't want to say not. There was no regret in that decision to say I don't know, but in saying I don't know, I opened myself up to a Pandora's box of explanations, because that was when the dream manipulation started. That was when the paranormal activity began. And I started seeing light orbs, and I started, you know, the apparitions started coming, shit in my apartment getting pushed over, and, you know, and then you're like, oh, no, I really don't know, you know, but I know, you know, but once you say that, I don't know, and you're willing to go up that ladder of explanation a little bit higher, it eliminates all plausible explanations behind it.
Right.
It's definitely not my neighbors. It's definitely not my family. It's definitely not, you know, it's definitely not the local police. It's not the CIA. It's not the FBI. It's no human institution has the ability to do some of the shit that I have experienced. Now, and now moving forward from that stage. So the fear exposure thing still kind of played out. Well, now you get to a point where it's like, they almost push you into a corner or to make you understand. Let me put it this way. They almost force you into coming to the awareness that creative ability is of the utmost importance. Okay. So, and I'll bring in a biblical story to really make sense of this. So if you look in Genesis, right, when God had created Adam, and then first he created all the animals, and then he created Adam to put him in charge of the animals. And then it says that God brought the animals to Adam one by one and asked him to name him. That was his job, right? So as God's bringing him the animals, Adam's there and he's going, let's see, I'll call that zebra, and I'll call that a dog. And what's that thing there? We'll call that a lion, and we'll call that an elephant. That sounds good, right? So he had the ability to just make shit up. Right. You know what I mean? So these weren't like actual titles and names, right? He's just making shit up. He's just saying, I'll call this whatever. You know, it doesn't have a label, so I'm going to give it a label. And, you know, and that still holds true for humanity today. We have the ability to just make shit up. Like, we have the ability to just label things however the hell we wish to label them. And that's the subjective gift of being human, is that we have that ability to label things. All right. So I began to view this phenomena as an old concept with new terminology applied to it, you know. So by this point now, I had begun to heal tremendously. I mean, I'm talking like insurance companies can't pay enough money for this kind of healing. I'm talking like I have been through in my life, you know, I'm just throwing myself out there so people fully understand the amount of rehabilitation that I've attempted to put myself through to get sober and stay sober. I have been through over 100, maybe 200 hours of intensive outpatient and outpatient. I have been through over a dozen rehabs. I have been through equally as many detoxes. I've spent 5 years in jails for my alcoholism, you know, drinking and driving, that kind of nonsense, not being able to stop. I've lost children. You know, I lost contact with my 2 children over this, my first 2 children, not the one I have now, thank God. But I went through a year-long faith-based rehabilitation called Teen Challenge. And I had periods of sobriety throughout this where, like, I'd go back to college, I'd start getting my life together, like I'd get involved with, you know, but there was always that nagging leech of addiction always on me, saying that I can have one foot on this side of the fence and one foot on the other side of the fence and be able to live in both worlds and manage this, you know. It was my, you know, an alcoholic is described as an egomaniac with an inferiority complex, and I fit that bill to a T. to a T.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's perfect.
I was an egomaniac with an inferiority complex my entire life, right? So there was almost this dichotomy within me that had been building up and building up and building up, this, you know, this split personality kind of a thing. So once I began to heal and, you know, got a job, got an apartment, you know, got, you know, paid the stuff to get my license back, got rid of the one car that Rebecca and I were living out of and got a brand new car. You know, Lucy was on her way, right? So like, and now I'm like, and my parents are coming over and they're like, I don't know what the hell happened to you, but like, we have never seen you do that. Like, it's just noticeable to everybody. It's noticeable to everybody. I didn't go through an ounce of withdrawal. I have not, since that happened that night, I have not had one craving to drink or do drugs. Not one. Completely took that taste out of my mouth, completely took that desire out of my head. And, I began to wonder if this was some other, you know, if this had happened to other people. So I went online, I started looking around, and I started looking at the targeted individual community, right? Because, you know, from the get-go, there was always this, like, there's a lot of like weird things that happen with this that seem very technologically based, right? Right. And you have to understand too that the mind will create forms in and of itself. So if you're hearing a voice and it's a male voice and it's speaking English, immediately you think an English speaking human person. It's just natural. It's very natural that you're going to put a form with what it is that you're hearing. I hear a car going down the street. My mind knows that it's a car. Like I hear it. It's a car. Like I know this. So when you start hearing voices and they're male or they're female and you can hear the age kind of associated with it, well, now your brain begins to develop and formulate form with that. Right. So you're automatically thinking this is some sort of a human entity or enterprise that is doing this. So you're, you know, and then you start thinking, well, who has the capacity to do such a thing? And then you start seeing things like V2K. Then you start, you know, you experience things like you're being touched on your body and like things are happening. And you start seeing things like remote neural monitoring. And they make sense, right? So Kant said that truth is the agreement of cognition with its object. Right. So if you really think about that, right? Truth is the agreement of cognition with its object. So I have something that I perceive to be a truth. And in my head, I'm formulating an object, a form to go along with that truth that I'm making. So then I go online and I see a patent for V2K. I see a patent for remote neural monitoring. I see other people that are saying that this is what it is. Well, now the truth that I have formulated has met an object outside of me and it's in agreement with it. Right. So, man, you cannot blame anybody for thinking that this is what it is. Right. Right. However, when you do thorough research, you find out that this is a very common concept and a common occurrence and experience that has been happening for a long time. As long as man has been documenting, he has been documenting the influence of some sort of interdimensional entity behind the scenes of man manipulating man, right? The minds of man. And I don't care what religion you're in, they have a different name for it, whether it's jinn, it's demons, it's devas, it doesn't matter. Right. But even if in Indian culture, they have, you know, the skinwalkers, and then there's all kinds of names when you get into that. And when you deal with Hinduism, they have all kinds, you know, it doesn't matter. It's been documented for a long time. Right. We just now have new terms and phrases and documents, you know, for these things. So looking at the targeted individual community, very, very, very much stuck in a state of suffering and trauma. Every now and then I would find somebody who found peace and joy and happiness and comfort and recovery and recuperation in it, but it was far and few in between.
Can I interrupt real quick and ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so you're on going to Reddit and you're looking at these targeted individual spaces. Did you ever try to go, get a diagnosis or anything on that level? Did you start taking medicine? You did for a little while, right?
No, I did this thing completely unmedicated.
Okay.
No
I love that.
Whatsoever.
I love that perspective is there now, and you and I have such a different perspective because I did the medicine hardcore and went all in on it for how years, right? And then you, of course, and I never even knew about the targeted individual thing until 7, 8 years into my experience. So it's a different thing for you. I love that we can contrast and compare our different experiences on that. But
now I had 2 times where it got so heavy that I went to the hospital, and and the one time I actually sat down with a group of psychiatrists there and explained everything that had been going on. And although they did not want to, they didn't even want to entertain the concept that what was occurring was originating from outside of my mind. All 3 of them were in agreement amongst themselves, not me, that what had happened was schizophrenia, and that I just did an exceptional job at analyzing my own lunacy,
right,
and bringing myself back to a state of homeostasis. But again, there was no medication prescribed, no further, anything to see them. With that occurrence, that was a tactile sensation where, all right, so there's like a gland right here, kind of in your jaw, like up in this area. And for about 3 days, there was so much pressure on it. I could actually, whatever chemical or is released from that gland, I could taste it in my mouth.
Right.
And it was causing an extreme amount of anxiety and stress, to the point where I had to get off the forklift at work and walk down an aisle out of camera sight and blow off steam. So I wound up going to the hospital, and I had x-rays done of everything, which is what you should do, just to see if anything was wrong. Was there any swelling? Was there any an infection? Was there anything? And nothing. And of course, as soon as they went to do the x-ray, it just went away. And I was like, you sons of bitches, man, sons of bitches, and of course, from a doctor's perspective, it would be considered psychosemantics, like I'm doing this to myself, but it's like, right. I've just been through too much to know that that's not what it is. So yeah, no, and I haven't experienced that, maybe like a little hit or two. And that was maybe 6 months ago, 7 months ago, but and I haven't experienced it really since then. It was just that one ordeal, and then it went away. Right. Yeah, but when that happens, handle it appropriately. Go to the hospital, get yourself checked out, because you never know, you could have an infection, but there's a lot of things that happen with this where it's not a cause. It's not a cause of your environment. It's not a cause of your own body. It's not, it's just the phenomena interacting with your physicalities and causing suffering within your body and things to hurt. And right. If you're into chakra openings or anything like that, I mean, and that's something else that I've experienced throughout this. Every single one of my chakras opening, my crown chakra, my third eye chakra, my throat, my solar plexus, my root chakra, all of these things vibrating, to a point where my entire body is in a state of vibration.
Yeah. And when you talk about that aspect of it, in the in those communities and in that meditation and stuff like that, is a lot of times where that term dark night of the soul comes from. And they talk about the Kundalini awakening, right? Then that's the spine and all that. And it's all together, right? It all is part of it. But
yeah, so I mean, and to try to relay a message like that in the targeted individual community is very difficult, because they have the concept of directed energy weapon, right?
Exactly.
So meaning that there are satellites out there that have the ability to direct energy, precision, pinpoint at somebody and hit them with it. And I've had nights where, and I shared this in our last, the session you and I did, I've had nights where it was just boom, I was blasted. I mean, blasted with some sort of painful energy that felt like it was pushing my face into my pillow, and you're just stunned. I've been hit with some sort of a blinding. I want to say pulse or something like that, but it's that high pitched ringing we hear.
Yeah. They
exaggerated that and turned up the knob to about 2000. And it gets so intense, you're paralyzed. You're absolutely paralyzed. You can do absolutely nothing. but shut your eyes. You see a bright white light, and you just have to lay there and take it.
This is going to be, this might be surprising to you because I haven't brought this up, Kevin, but I call that. I have a name for that exactly what, because it happened to me too. It only happened once, thank goodness, in 10 years.
Yeah, me too, only once.
Okay, yeah. So I call that the brain blast. Like it felt like they just blasted my brain with energy, and it just disabled me.
Yeah, it's completely disabling. It is. Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but I remember after that being like, "Whoa, that was one of the more intense things that I've ever experienced with that." And it's like, you know, I don't know what this is, and I do my best to not place, direct labels on it. From a Buddhist perspective, I have labels that I place on it. But the understanding that they could do that at any time and choose not to, so it's almost like a fear tactic. They give you that one blast to let you know, we could do this. We could just turn this thing on and walk the hell away. We could just, yeah. And that, and it's like, yeah, you could. And then, then there's that rebellious side of you that's like, bring it on. I don't give a shit. Like, you know what I mean? Like your rebellious nature wants to kick in when you have that realization, it's like, oh, you think that's going to change me? Now, mind you, that happened, right? That happened after intense change had already occurred. So it wasn't like that was done to create change. Change had already occurred. They just did that for whatever reason, just to show me capabilities, just to show me it has the ability to do this. But it wasn't like we're doing this so you change, because I had already changed, right? So yeah, so whatever. All right, so back to positive targeted individual. I've started spending a lot of times in the targeted individual communities, right? And that's when I met Peter, on OTIR, and read a lot of the work that he had put in. And that was the first time that I had read something that made sense to me, because he had done extensive research into it, and he had done interviews with people, and he too had come to find out that what we were all experiencing was some sort of a behavioral modification program or fear exposure therapy program, and that the signs and symptoms that we were experiencing had dated back far before the technology even it was even invented by humans. So then you start having to question yourself, like, okay, even if this is technology, this has been being utilized in this fashion for a long time before even radio waves were discovered, right? Because you start reading cases of people from like the 1700s and the 1800s where they went through the same exact thing, phase by phase, sequence by sequence, the same exact signs and symptoms, the same everything. Mm-hmm. And then you look at like things like demonic possession, and you're like, dude, this is nothing new. All right. There may be, there may be some new players that are trying to get into the game. I don't doubt that. But what is actually occurring is nothing new. So, again, you're left with a lot of compassion for the targeted individual community. You're left with a lot of understanding, but you're also left with the possibilities of and the potential of what this could be. It doesn't have to be what you think it is, because it will play into what your mind thinks it is. But if you can possess the capability and possess the capacity to turn it into something that you want, then it will become that. If you want to look at it and say, I view this as torture, then you will be tortured. If you want to look at it and say, I want to be taught, then you will be taught. And that's just how this goes. It plays off of your own perception towards it. Right. So once I came to that realization, I noticed that there were no communities on any social media platform that were dedicated to strictly that perception, that were dedicated to strictly viewing this as a means to become psychologically and emotionally and spiritually more in tune. Right. So that's what I based PositiveTI on. So, that required a lot of guidelines. And number one was it has to be a therapeutic community. And
Yes.
then, and then number two was people get carried away with the who is this. And for me, I remember I just told you, like, one of the most relieving things was the ability to say I don't know, because then I was able to view myself in relation to it and not constantly focus on what the hell is this.
Exactly.
Right. And that's where the growth resided. So that was another guideline. And then the technology talk, because that goes nowhere. And all the TI communities I've ever been in, it just goes around and around and around and around and around. So when you start looking at the TI communities and the cycle of bullshit that just goes around and around and around, I said, okay, well, I'll just create a community that has none of that, and let's see what happens. And that's what that whole thing was predicated on. And now, and that was a year ago, and now we're up to almost, I think we're at almost 700 members.
Yeah.
And what it did was it drew in, and this is the fascinating part about this community, right? And is that it drew in members from the Hearing Voices Network, and it drew in members from experiencers, and it drew in members from Interdimensional NHI, and it drew in members from starseeds and from schizophrenia. And so then you start seeing a pattern. You're like, oh, okay. So a wide variety of communities are all experiencing the same exact thing, maybe with little different degrees of nuance, right? So, and the only difference is that they have different labels for it. What we call V2K, they call channeling. What we call V2K, they call telepathy. Well, all these different, they just have different names for the same occurrence. But the labels that they place on it determine the outcome of the experience. Right. That was an eye opener for me. Because then you begin to realize that in the target individual community, one of the biggest problems is that the belief that there is a human enterprise or a human entity that is behind this. And that is a big fear, to think that there are humans, right? Humans that are doing this to you.
That's the scarier part.
That's
you're right.
The scarier part. Is that some ignorant, delusional, power tripping entity is out there that is doing this to me. Well, now you just feel like a guinea pig. Now you're going to be tortured, and I've been there. Like, I get that. But when you can really kind of push through that and start climbing up that ladder of who and how and what and where and why, and start focusing on yourself in relation to the experience, and not just what is being done to you, but how you're being involved with this, and how it's operating through you and with you. And that's where the growth is, when you begin to turn extrospection into introspection,
Right. And so you saw on this TI community, and so you started, is that right? You started r/PositiveTI? You started that yourself, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I did.
And of course, so for anyone who isn't aware of Kevin, he started this subreddit called r/PositiveTI, and he created these 12 steps, basically kind of like an Alcoholics Anonymous version of a TI experience of targeted individuals. And what's great about those steps is that it covers pretty much whoever you are and whatever angle you're coming into this experience from, whether you think, oh, I'm demonically possessed, what should I do? Or I got to talk to an alien last night, what do I do? Or God talked to me in my head, I'm feeling really weird about it, what do I do? All these different ones all come together, and the steps that you lined out work regardless. You know what I mean? You can just plug them into any one of these scenarios. And that's what's so great about this subreddit. So anyone out there who you might be experiencing some of this, if you haven't been to PositiveTI on Reddit, please go there and check it out, because it might be the only thing really doing what your original vision was to do. There are other guys, like you said, Peter. I love Peter. I think he seems like a great dude, and the interview that you had with Peter was so illuminating and changed my life. Yeah. But still, he's kind of doing his own thing or whatever now. But the main point is that Positive TI was just gigantic and being groundbreaking, and so now here you are. We're looking at it and I guess saying, well, hold on, what do we do about all these intersections of these different types of experiences? Is there a place for all these people to be? Because this, someone who thinks they're a star seed and they're always talking to other star seeds, if someone comes into their group and says, I'm a targeted individual, they zap me with V2K all day in my brain, they're going to go, well, you're not in our group. We're not trying to talk about that. Right. But they're having the same experience, Right. And so that's kind of, I guess, what Parawareness, the paranormal awareness, the Parawareness channel is kind of about, right? Is taking that concept and trying to embrace it in that way.
Yeah, I mean, this has always been my goal, is to, kind of tear down some of these walls that are built up, because the walls that are built up dividing and segregating a lot of these communities are just made up of labels. Right. They're just made up of titles and names and adjectives. And, so that's my goal for the future, is to continue bringing down these walls and continue bringing awareness, because, and it's so funny. So if I make a post in Experiencers or Interdimensional NHI, and I mention the word targeted individual, or I mention the word V2K, or anything along those lines whatsoever, immediately, like, either they'll get rid of it or I'll just get trashed. I get out of here on here. But if I just change one word, well, now all of a sudden it's relatable, and just the upvotes go up through the roof, and everybody wants a piece, everybody wants to talk about it, discuss it. And, I've been there too. I'm going, and it's, and it's crazy. So, a lot of what we deal with is the repercussions of coming in contact with the negative aspects of phenomena. Okay. Right. And, you really have to come to a place where your mind is completely geared towards what do people need, right? Because the last thing that the targeted individual community needs is more confusion. The last thing the targeted individual community needs is more chaos, more anger, more fear, more frustration, more, rage, more hatred, more like retaliation, more, whatever. It doesn't, more madness. It doesn't need that. There's plenty of that there already, and it's going nowhere. What is needed is a different perspective that helps to cultivate compassion towards one another, right? That helps to cultivate a better understanding of what other people are going through. The ability to humble yourself and say, I don't know, which is why that first step is exactly what it is, because that's the most important one. The first step's always the hardest, right? The first step is always the hardest one, and what that first step is we humbly admit that we claim ignorance over what the origin, of our affliction is. And because I have noticed with this phenomena, I don't want to say primarily, but it predominantly feeds into the ego of a human being. Right. And this is how it manipulates our mind. And this was kind of, going into the post that I made yesterday, the point that I was trying to get across. So, our ego, which is the aspect of us that isn't comfortable saying, I don't know. That's the aspect of us that isn't comfortable with feeling insignificant in the world. It's the part of us that, we interpret the world through our sensory organs. And then we kind of come up with like a creative thing, like, with like this self-image of who I want to be in the world. And then I'm going to portray that self-image of who I am out into the rest of the world and kind of see how this works out for me. It's the part of you that wants to be seen, but don't look at all of me. It really wants to be heard, but don't listen. You know what I mean? So that's, right. And that's what this phenomena targets directly. It targets the part of us that doesn't want to admit that we're confused, that's because we come into this world inherently confused. You don't have a choice, unless, we come into this world and we have no clue what the hell we're doing here, why we're supposed to be here, why we exist, what this is, like what I'm, we have no clue what's going on here. And unless somebody dogmatically imparts some sort of a worldview or spiritual or religious view on you at a very early age, you'll kind of grow up and have to figure things out on your own. But we come into this world without an explanation backed by empirical evidence. We just don't know. So we are inherently confused when we come into this world. We just don't know. And there's always this drive to feel significant, right? Like we're an individual amongst 8 billion, just shy of 8 billion others on this planet. And we have this like individuation part of us that wants to kind of like, we want to be seen, like we want to matter. We really want to matter. We want to do something that makes an impact, right? Because we live in an impactful world. Like, it's a very concrete and steel and hard environment. It's an impactful environment anyway, and we're a part of that environment. So we want to be impactful. We want to, represent the environment that we're in. So we have this part of us that wants to be significant, right? We have this part of us that's inherently confused and inherently insignificant. So we overcompensate for that with arrogance and significance. I know everything and I matter, right? And that's your ego, right? And that's what this thing targets directly. I know everything and I matter. All right. So if you can come to that understanding and come to the realization that it's those two things that it really hones in on, right? And then you have to really look at, well, what are all the ways that I've been trying to matter in the world? Accumulation of material possession, money, my relationships, my sex drive, how many women I've had sex with, my furniture, my car, like all these things, right? And then you have to come to the understanding that everything, and this is where Buddhism kind of comes into the play with all this. I said, like I told you, I've taken a very Buddhist perception towards this, is that everything's in a state of entropy. Everything, me, you, this computer, this table, the computer's sitting on, the trees outside, that building, this planet, this world, this me, everything. It's all impermanent. Everything is on its way to dying, right?
Right.
So we have this ego that wants to, tell us that everything is important, and it's kind of not. We have this ego that tells us that everything's significant when really everything is in a state of entropy and it's dying and it's all going to decay and be gone, right? And that's what this thing hones in on, is that it wants to exploit it. Primarily, predominantly that's what this thing does. It wants to exploit our ego and take advantage of those two inherent states of being, right? So if you can understand that, if you can really, really, really understand that, well, then you begin to understand that the voices only speak to the ego. So if you take Carl Jung's concept of how the brain is divided up into three parts, right? You have the ego, right? And then you have the personal unconscious, right? Which is the part of the brain that's responsible for our stored memories. And then you have the collective unconscious, right? Which is our ancestral accumulation. It's the part of the brain that makes prayer possible. It's the part of the brain that is connected to elsewhere, right? It's the part of the brain responsible for synchronicity. It's the part of the, all right. So it's all this, it's that magic, so we do have the magical part of the brain. Well, what happens is, there's a veil that's torn. Okay. And the collective unconscious, right? Whatever it is that you've been tapped into begins to spill through. And now it has access to your personal unconscious and all your memories and your data bank of background and all your stored emotions that are involved with that. And then it comes into your ego, right? And in Buddhism, Mara, who is basically the Buddhist version of Satan, is called the Lord of the Senses. He's called, that's what his name is. He's the Lord of the Senses, right? And he uses very tricky talk and very tricky words to manipulate man behind the scenes to get him to remain attached to this world. Right. So the illusion is that we remain attached to all these things. Right. And these things give us comfort and they give us pleasure. Right. And they give us significance and importance. And none of it really has long lasting significance and importance. Even our emotions, happiness comes and goes, joy comes and goes, pain comes and goes. But we cling to these things. Either we're clinging to it or we push it away from us. We're in a constant state of clinging and aversion all day long. I don't like this. Get it the hell away from me. I love this. Give me more of that. Right. And that's what it harnesses in on. That's what it hones in on, this thing. It hones in on the egoistic aspect of the human psyche that wants to view this world as a place of permanence and significance. So if you can begin to look at it like that, right, you can either get tortured by it or you can examine its methodology and you can learn a lot about Mara and then learn how to overcome it but it's not a matter of overcoming it. It's a matter of changing your energy so that you stand in contrast to it, right? Not in opposition
Right.
to it, in contrast to it, right? So if you look at, and this is where we find the split between Christianity and Buddhism, right? And in Christianity, we have a very dualistic perception, meaning evil versus good, good versus evil, right? We have this battle all the time, back and forth, right? This dualistic, duality, going back and forth, almost like a very Star Wars kind of a theme. It's a very Star Wars kind of a narrative. And so we have this drive to overcome, to stomp out and suffocate evil. Whereas in Buddhism,
Right.
we have a very non-dualistic perception, meaning good necessitates evil, and vice versa, evil necessitates good, meaning we wouldn't know what light is without dark, and we wouldn't know what dark is without light. We wouldn't know what good is without evil, when we wouldn't know what evil is without good. We don't have
Exactly.
a Satan without a God, and we don't have a God without a Satan, and we don't have sin without, all these things, all these contradictions in life, all the things that this that this experience exposes you to in very extreme ways. The back and forth that I mentioned when we started this conversation, that's how it starts off, back and forth, and then you got to find yourself in the middle. Right, you got to find yourself in the middle of all that, and you have to learn to accept the extreme states, right? And you begin to learn that, conceptually speaking, if you want to view Mara as the full embodiment of evil, and Buddha as the full embodiment of goodness, really both are the same concept, and that is the concept of human manifestation and everything that's in that gray area in between. But you have to have that balance marker.
Right.
But it's up to you. It's up to you what you want to resonate with.
That's right. Yeah. In my, so I'm just now getting into Buddhism thanks to you. But in my early days as a youngster, I read a book that kind of took a Buddhistic type of approach. Buddhistic, I don't know if that's a word, but Buddhism type of approach to God, and kind of using some of it was a man who was raised in a Christian world who was like, let me learn, and then he started learning these other concepts, and then he saw a way to put them together. And it kind of happened very organically. But anyway, the point is that, so I come in going, oh, okay, I understand some of these concepts. I understand that there is no, under this philosophy, there is no right or wrong, because like you said, you don't know black if there is, you don't understand what black is if you've never seen white, or vice versa, right? And so all good and bad is just about experience. And every single moment we are choosing what experience to acknowledge from within ourselves and in our perception, and that it creates our path, kind of, right? Like, in a way.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of it is cultivation of your intentions as well, that I'm learning, and I'm learning that we don't really get what we want in this life. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. We don't get what we deserve. We get what our intentions deserve, if that makes sense, right? So, because a lot of times our intentions have very evil underlying issues going on with them. But if you can really learn
that we sometimes don't even know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Right. Or a lot of times, we're just being very, very fake about things. But when you can really learn to be, first of all, honest with yourself, right? And honesty is a very, it's a difficult undertaking, because there's a lot of things that are required to be fully honest, right? But it requires full honesty to be able to see things a little bit more clearly. Otherwise, you're just creating a false reality. And one of those things is, first of all, being completely honest with yourself. Everything that you've ever done, how you did it, how you went about doing it, who you are in the present moment, why you are the way that you are in the present moment, all of the regrets that you've had, all of the remorse that you hold on to, the embarrassing moments, and the cause and effect that led up to each one of those things. And the amount of confusion that's behind all of that, because that's what all this really comes down to, is confusion. There's a Buddhist prayer that revolves around all of that. I forgive myself for my confusions, because I believe that when we're dealing with sin, there's really more confusion involved with sinful activity more so than ill intention. There's just or confusion. There's a lot of confusion that's going on there. And a lot of that is developed because we don't understand ourselves, or we don't understand other people. We don't understand why things are the way that they are. And one of the main Buddhist precepts is zero intoxicants, none, no alcohol,
Right.
no drugs, no nothing.
No
You have to stop
nicotine.
that crap. You have to stop it, right? Because what you're doing when you're even with drinking is you're creating a false reality. Right. Not only are you creating a false reality, but you're creating memories that have the wrong emotion attached to them. And this is a big thing that a lot of people don't understand. Like when I had to go back and kind of like revisit my past, I had been drinking and drugging for so long. I didn't even have the right emotion placed on my life experiences, especially dealing with like stimulants and stuff like that. Like driving your car is not meant to be experienced with the same emotion as going to the Super Bowl. Like that's just not, you know what I mean? Washing my dishes is not meant to have the same emotion attached to it as a Rage Against the Machine concert.
Yeah, and,
So
and
you
how
really-
and how weird that we think that it's like, why can't I just always stay in that? It's almost like, why would you want to? Do you not want to explore? You know what I mean? You don't want to explore what's out there? Yeah.
So the importance of being able to go back and reflect openly and honestly, all right. And then the importance of being able to view yourself in full transparency, right? Because until you're able to view yourself in full transparency, you're going to have a very difficult time coming to certain realizations about the phenomena and how the phenomena operates, right? So, and a lot of things that people are saying that have kind of been going through this process and are relaying certain concepts out there and certain realizations that they're coming to, you're not going to understand that. You're not going to resonate that. And I had a very similar problem with Buddhism. When I first got into Buddhism, reading things, it's like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. You know what I mean? Like I get it. Like I could see how that is truthful and makes sense with human psychology and the world and, an illusion, the illusion that we live in with everything. Because a lot of Buddhism is very like matrix simulation, like, and this was 2,500 years ago. He's talking about stuff that quantum mechanics is verifying now. So it's like,
yes,
it really gets very esoteric in nature, but it's honest and it's truthful. But you really don't fully understand this stuff until you're able to really calm your mind and come to a truthful, transparent reflection about yourself and how you relate to the world and life in general. And, you got to stop taking the drugs and you got to start being honest with yourself, like about everything. I mean, every little thing in life, be honest about it,
Yeah. And, that's one of the things that is so interesting and across the board in all these different communities and all these different experiences. People are saying things that go along with each other. For instance, they're saying, I had a sudden, I want to see if you went through this because I did. And I've heard a lot of other people who went through it as well. But I had a sudden urge to never kill another being, whether it was a roach or a spider. I don't kill those things anymore. And that felt like part of my change. And, in Buddhism, it says like don't kill anything. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like if you can,
yeah, I don't even eat. Yeah. I completely stopped almost 20 months ago now. I went vegetarian and I haven't touched any of it.
Yeah.
Well, you start, you know what it is? Like you start viewing things as energy, right? And, especially dealing with this, like, cause there's a lot of energy interaction going on. So you start realizing that certain energies create negative output. Right. And then, so you really want to start like grounding yourself and doing grounding work. And then you start looking at like our food industry in this country and how these chickens are just smashed into cages, if they're not cage free or, and they're just in a state of suffering and fear and anxiety and stress for their entire life. And then we consume that. Right. We consume that meat. Same with the cows. Same with, everything.
So what you're saying, all this ties into, it's not about, and this kind of goes with good and bad and knowing like, when you say like, I'm not supposed to do that because it's bad, or I'm not supposed to say that word because it's a bad word, which I think is, it's a pretty ludicrous concept. And I'm making a sound with my mouth and it's bad. What does that mean? Right. But so, but what it comes down to is, are you being honest and true to yourself with these things? Are you acting in accordance with your own beliefs and your own gut feeling and your own intuition and discernment and all that? Are you doing what you feel like you're supposed to truly be doing? Right. And if you're doing what you feel like you're supposed to truly be doing, you can't really complain, and you're doing it right. But everyone's going to tell you you're doing it wrong, right? Usually that's how it works.
Yeah. And that's always subject to change. I mean, like we said last time, we're never the same person twice, because we're always going through experiences that cultivate us, especially if you've taken like a spiritual path in life and you've chosen to perceive everything as a means of teaching you how to become more spiritually aware and teaching you how to become more spiritually enlightened, so you're going to view things much differently depending on what it is that you're in this life for. Are you in it for service to self or service to others? Are you in it for accumulation of possessions and wealth, or are you in it to to become enlightened? Like, what are your personal beliefs? And again, going back to the story with Adam, we have that right. We have that right to just make it up. So yeah, and for me, that the spiritual approach, I guess I don't find deeper meaning in anything else. Like, when you really look at the impermanence of everything in this world and what we get to take with us when we pass on, and what actually matters in life when we go to transform our energy, because that's all I look at death as, is a transformation of energy. I mean, we're an energy being. We're incorporated with a consciousness, with awareness. And if you look at one of the laws of energy, energy is neither created nor destroyed. It simply transforms into becoming something else. And
that's
this,
right.
And this, kind of gives a little bit of credibility to reincarnation when you can look at it like that. Is that we're simply becoming something else. Now, in Buddhism, reincarnation is kind of viewed as, you're not really necessarily you're bringing your karmic, energy with you. Meaning, like, if you've had some knots tangled up in this life, you're going to have to work those knots out either in the next life or the next life after that. And that is depending on the energy that you bring with you, right, into the next life. But really, it's more or less like, if I have a candle here that's not lit, and I have a candle here that is lit, and I light that candle with this candle, and then I blow that one out, and now this one is lit. So it's kind of like, it is a transfer of energy, but now this one no longer exists. But it was the same energy that created this one, but now I have an entirely different source of energy. And right, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's no more of this in that, but this was because of this. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Okay, so it's that transference of energy into the next one. So and the more I get into it, and the more I look at it, it makes, when you look at the cyclical, the cyclical way of life, and how flowers go up and they turn into compost, and that compost creates more flowers, and then it comes, the trash, and then flowers, and then boom, and back and forth, the whole cyclical event of life and death, and birth and pain and suffering and clinging, and our very act of coming into this world, right? We're created in pleasure, and we're birthed through pain.
Through pain,
right?
Yeah.
Well,
and when you think about it,
it's pleasure that creates us, and then pain, we come into this world, and your mother suffers while she's giving birth to you, and then there's joy because the new baby's here, hopefully, right? And then you go through a life of ups and downs, and joy and suffering, and then we die, and then we come out, and we do it again. So the whole point of Buddhism, not to get too far away from the targeted individual and, the experience and everything with it, but the whole point of Buddhism is to see this life for what it is, this transference of energy, this back and forth, up and down, the extremes, all of this, right? We're in a world of extremes, and then to learn how to liberate yourself from that. And how do we liberate ourselves from that? You got to see that for what it is and detach from it. Stop responding, right? And then when you can learn how to not respond to the world as the world is, you become very thankful for this process, right? Because that's what this process, if you choose to, that's what this process will teach you, is to know how not to be so responsive to shit that doesn't matter. Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, right?
You're right. Yeah.
So there are certain things that do matter. Our enlightenment. Our enlightenment matters, helping other people that that need help. Using our suffering to help other people that are in a current state of suffering, so that they have to suffer less. Learning to develop compassion. Learning how to develop patience. We live in a dimension of time, right? And if there are other dimensions out there, which there are, they may not have the same time constraints as we do, right? So patience itself, right, is a byproduct of being in a dimension of time. So learn patience while you're here, right? Learn how to perceive death appropriately. Learn how to perceive birth appropriately. All the things that time dictates must occur: entropy, birth, death, patience. Learn these things while you're here. Stop getting, and all the other stuff is just a distraction. All the music, the movies, the entertainment, the all of that is just a way to keep you from learning the things that you're supposed to learn while you're hearing, but yet that stuff is there so that you learn how to detach from it.
That's
so
right.
You see the balance here, right?
That's
so there's a balance here that plays, right? And in that aspect, you learn how to, the same way that Buddha did, you learn how to be thankful for Mara, right? So when Buddha was confronted with Mara, he was sitting in a cave and Mara approached the cave, right? And and when he approached the cave, you would think, right, like, don't get him near Buddha. Buddha invited him in. Come on in. Pour him tea.
Right.
Sat down and had tea with him, right?
So it's God inviting the devil in to have tea.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. So brought him in, and the same exact scenario that happened with Jesus happened with Buddha. Mara said to Buddha, why don't you let me be Buddha? I'm tired of being Mara. I don't want to be Mara anymore, And the Buddha was like, well, we can't do that. Somebody, he's like, you don't want to be Buddha. People always put words in my mouth. They twist up what it is that I'm trying to say. You need to be Mara and I need to be Buddha, right? So it's like you have these, and he stood in opposite, he stood in contrast to him. Right then and there at that moment, he made a defining line. He's like, no, like, you need to be you and I need to be me. I need to be white and you need to be black. I need to be yes and you need to be no. I need, so, and then, so you see that, right? And then that's how I've kind of begun to approach this thing, where it's like, I don't shun it. I don't have an aversion to it, because what you resist persists, as you always say. That's not a way to go. It's not a way to go, because if you resist it, it's just going to keep coming back at you. And that's the way that the universe works. Like, the universe is always in this way of kind of like perfecting itself. Like, it always just wants to go from better to better to better to more balance and more balance. And we're a part of the universe, right? So if you're being attacked at your weakest point, it's simply the universe's way of saying you need to work on this. And then once you work that out, you're going to get attacked at your next weakest point, and then your next weakest point, and but it's you being molded into this better, more perfect version of yourself. But to avoid it, to hide from it, whether it's synthetically through drugs and alcohol, or through physical running, which I've done all the time, or through it's telling yourself delusions and lies about yourself and yourself, And what this thing does, what this targeted individual experience does, is it hones in on those things. It hones in on your ego. It hones in on the delusions. It hones in on your insignificance and your significance. It hones in on your confusions about this world and who you are in this world, and your confusions about how you want to be perceived and how other people perceive you and how you think you are in relation to the world. Like, it hones in on all of these things, right? And then it actually pokes out and points out all the cracks that are in the dam. Right. And there's a lot of suffering involved with that, because we don't first of all, we don't even want to admit that there's cracks in our dam. We don't want to do the work to plug them. We just want a pill. We just want instant gratification. We just want to not suffer more. We want to suffer less. And it's like, well, you got to get yourself under control first. So.
Yeah. And that's a great point. And I tell you, so if there's been, if there's anything that puts you through suffering kind of like for no reason, it would be this, right? It comes out of nowhere. You don't even, at first you think you know what it is, and then you go through these billions of different ideas of what it could be. But the point is that you never really know what it is, and it's so confusing, and there's so little data that you can even catch about this, what's happening to you. You have no basis to build anything off of. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so you've talked to 6 different videos where you were interviewing TIs.
Right.
I'm more of like, I don't know about the other guys, but I'm more of like a schizophrenic than, than I was a TI all this time, but same thing. But where would you put in from you talking to other people, where would you put in the whole like experiencer and hey, dude, one thing that we don't even mention when we're talking about this is the glitch in the matrix or simulation theory.
Right.
Those also come into play. So all these different communities are having such a similar experience. But so can you talk about maybe like a thing that you either witnessed or heard someone tell, a story they told you that was like a big indicator where you were like, see, that community also is doing the same thing that we're doing, like experiencer or, demonic possession or anything like that? I don't know. Do you have any stories like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, even the people that respond to the posts because like I said, I can make a post for the targeted individual community and post it in a wide variety of communities.
Right.
And just change one or two words in there just so it doesn't get deleted by the mods. And then everybody relates. You start getting a whole like, and then some of like the realizations that you're coming to. And it's like, yes, I had the same realization.
Right.
So, and this was before the 24/7 experience, right? Back in July 28th, about 3 years ago, maybe even 4 years ago, I was driving through the desert in Nevada. I was in Nevada and New Mexico, driving through the desert, and I started hearing the voices big time, right? Well, at that point, I began, and up until that point, I never had an inner monologue that I knew of, meaning I never was able to hear my own voice inside my head or outside of myself, right? I was never able to hear my own voice. Well, then they began communicating and developing my own inner monologue to then turn into an inner dialogue with them. So there was a male and a female, and it was as if I felt like I was being cloned somewhere else. It was a very bizarre experience, but then I began to hear myself communicating with these other two male and female entities. And I could either sit back and listen to myself talking to them about God knows what, or I could chime in. I could connect to that other version of me speaking with them. Well, then I went through a 2-month period of like a good cop, bad cop. So if you can picture some metaphysical version of me sitting in a chair in an interrogation room, and the male and the female, the male on one side and the female on the other side, they started from my childhood and began bringing up everything from age 1 all the way up. And I'm listening to this and my voice would start flipping out. No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. You fucking liar. You fucking like just flipping out. And then I would have to tune in to it because now I'm having anxiety. Like, I'm like, what the shit? What is, I'm just like, what is going on right now? I don't even know what I'm hearing. Like, what is this?
Wow.
And then they would go through a cycle or a period of my life. And they would say the phrase, Kevin, you were the same person that you were 30 years ago. And then boom, they go back into it again for another 2 weeks, back and forth, going through and I'm hearing names of people I had forgotten about, secretaries of work. I forgot their names. Like, I'm here, all this stuff is coming up. And then we're stopping at embarrassing moments. We're stopping at guilt-ridden moments and we're dealing with it. And I'm like, yeah, I did that. I don't know why I did that. I was drunk and I should, all right, Kevin. And then boom, they go back into it. Like, all this, blah, 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 blah. And Kevin, you were the same person that you were 20 years ago. Go at it again. Kevin, you were the same person you were 15 years ago. Kevin, you were the same person you were 10 years ago. Kevin, you were the same person you have always been. And then boom, right? And then, I made a post somebody made a post and then I made a comment one day. And then lo and behold, Rusty Shackelford, the one.
Oh yeah.
Right. He's a moderator in PositiveTI. He goes, dude, I cannot. He's like, I thought I was the only one. He's like, they did the same exact the same exact thing to him. Now he's been going through this for like 9-10 years.
Right.
And then other people are like same exact thing. Like they feel like they're being cloned or uploaded or their mind is being hijacked into something. And I can safely say after that was years ago. And I'm still here. Nothing ever happened. I don't know. I have no plausible explanation for that. I don't know exactly what that was. It was just a going back into my, or just diving deep into my subconscious.
Yeah.
And creating an inner monologue that I now have full control over at various levels. I can, like sometimes when you're talking to yourself and you're almost using your vocal cords a little bit, kind of like humming a little bit, yeah, that. But then there's another level behind that. And then there's another level behind that. And it's almost like you gain the ability to have access to multiple levels of an inner monologue that is a control of different department and frequencies of your brain that go very deep.
Wow.
And you come to the realization eventually that those areas of the brain that occur on like lower sleep frequencies, I say that are inhabited. I believe there's other entities that communicate down there, and then you learn to have control over yourself. So
yeah,
once you learn that and you come to that realization that everything that you think is not alone, and that this area of your mind that you had always perceived and thought to be free of prosecution and free of judgment. I could envision killing you if I wanted to. I can envision having sex with whoever I want to. I can say whatever nasty, derogatory, racist thing that I want to.
Right.
Is not alone. Well, now all of a sudden your brain flips out. You go into a state of just saying things that you don't want to say just because you don't want to say it. The moment that you think about not saying something that you don't want to say for fear of embarrassment or coming across a certain way, it's too late. You've already thought it.
That's right.
It's out there. It's out there. You've already aired out the dirty laundry. So then you run into a panic mode where you're like, don't think anything. Don't think, you're thinking, and this is a big problem in like the mindfulness community that they run into when they begin to focus in on this. So it's almost like, mindfulness is, enforced on the individual from elsewhere. And then, you're aware that it's not alone and that the entities that are there are God knows who, are they judging me?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of guilt that has to be gotten through. There's a lot of not taking yourself seriously that has to be gotten through. There's so much. There's so much. I have revisited the same guilty childhood thing 2,000 times.
Right.
And eventually what happens is that these things are exasperated beyond measure until you no longer have an emotional attachment to it.
Yeah. The way I think about it is like, imagine if you run your hand across maybe like a piece of metal that has some parts that are irregular. And so you run your hand across that and it you can feel those irregularities that are sticking out. Right.
Right.
And so then you sand it down or you grind it down a little and you feel it and you're like, okay, it's not as bad as it was. When I first touched it, it cut my hand. Right. But now it's better. And you just keep working on it. They make me work on it over and over and over for every single thing I've ever felt bad about or feel bad about today. I have to work on every single thing and I have to grind it down and keep grinding until it's just beautiful, smooth, and it doesn't affect me at all. There's no ripples in the water whenever it comes up. Is that kind of what you're saying?
It is. I kind of had to get to a place of complete and total forgiveness. Right. And then, you start really, and this is one of the steps, right? You have to really learn to forgive yourself because you come to the understanding of how susceptible the mind is to manipulation. And you don't know then you come into the thought trap. Like, how long has this shit been going on? Like, how long have I been being subconsciously manipulated by some other entity and I'm just unaware of it? And because if you think about your, free will, right? The slightest manipulation at any point in your life, right, would dictate so much more. The littlest thing, the littlest sliver of manipulation in your life would, has the potential to completely steer your life in a whole different path. So then you start thinking like, am I responsible for feeling guilty and shameful over some other entity's manipulation?
Right.
Right. Is that, so then you're like, what how much, it's like, you really got to go through, and that's a reasonable thought. That's a very reasonable thought. It may not seem very reasonable to people that are very unfamiliar with this, but when you come to the full awareness, not belief or understanding, but the full knowing and knowledge that your mind is manipulated and is easily manipulated, easily manipulated.
Oh, yeah.
And without your understanding or knowing, you have to come to that thought process. Well, how much of this was a setup? How much of my past nefarious activity should I actually hold myself responsible and accountable for? Should I feel guilt over any of this? And the answer to that is, I don't know. So you have to come to a place of, I forgive myself for any confusions that I harbor. I forgive myself for any actions that may or may not have been of my own doing. I forgive any other entity that may have been maliciously operating behind the scenes, causing me to do things that were against my own free will. And there's a lot of relief in that.
Yeah,
There's a lot of relief, because they like to take things from the past and bring them up and throw them in your face. You'll just have like the sudden awareness of something that you did, out of nowhere. You'll just be at work, listening to music, and then all of a sudden you're hit with the full imagery, smells, sensations, and thoughts of something 20 years ago. And it's like you're there, and it's so vivid, and you're like, whoa, like where did that even come from? And it's them trying to enforce guilt on you. And again, playing into the ego of an individual, wanting to maintain an association with your mind. So, it's like there's a crisis, and this is what I was talking about in my post yesterday. Like there's this crisis situation there where they make themselves known, right? And when they make themselves known at that crisis situation, you view the crisis as the cause for them being there. Well, certainly they're here because, and I'll use my case as a scenario. Certainly they're here because I'm trying to get my shit together, because I just found out my girlfriend is pregnant and I need help. Right. So there's that crisis situation. So you're very accepting of their presence. Boom. Like, oh, thank God I got help. Right. And then as time goes on, and you're like dealing with things, and you're dealing with yourself, and you're returning to a place of balance and like restoration, and it's still continuing, you're like, all right, well, now I have a problem. You're like, all right. So now it's like they're implementing a problem, and you're still viewing them as a source of a solution. Right. So you're like, here's a problem. And I keep coming up with these solutions, but are these actual solutions to a problem? Like, yeah, they're quieting down, but that quieting down of the voices and the negative energy could just be them being pretentious and trying to play Pavlov's dog with my brain, right? And you get stuck in this thing back and forth. So now it's like, now they're the problem, right? So now you're like, everything in my life is restored. Like, I have a very fully functioning routine every day that I go through. I now have a child who's over a year old, who is she has wonderful, beautiful, stable environment that she's in. Both of her parents are sober. She's happy as a pig, and we have a great environment, right? And yet this thing would still persist. And it's like, all right, now you're the problem. Right. Now you're the problem. Now you're creating a problem. So what? Now you're forcing me to find a solution for you being the problem, when I initially viewed you as the solution to a problem that you may have created in the first place.
Right.
See where I'm going with this? And that was the point of the post that I made yesterday. And that's a hard thing to really wrap your mind around, right? So now you have this entity that is the problem and the solution in one entity. What does that do? Eventually that has to kind of implode on itself, right? And you have to see that. You have to see them as the problem and the solution simultaneously, that needs to kind of just implode in on itself, because the more that you say, I have a problem, well, you have to admit that you have a problem, and they're going to want to give you a solution. And the more that you say they're a solution, well, now you have to admit that a problem exists in the first place, right? So you really have to get to a point past problems and solutions, which is really what the Buddhist concept of cause and effect is, that we're stuck in this cycle of cause and effect and cause and effect. And for each cause, you have to find an effect. And for each effect, there's going to be a cause. And for each effect, there's potentially another problem. And World War II is a great example of this, right? We're at war, right? So we have this problem. I have a solution. Let's create an atomic bomb, right? And that'll end World War II, right? So now we have an atomic bomb, right? And now we have a problem. Japan's attacking. So let's drop it on Japan. Boom. There's a solution. Well, now Russia says, shit, we have a problem. We need to create atomic weaponry. And then America says, shit, Russia's creating atomic weaponry. Now we need to create more atomic weaponry. So you have this problem, then you have a solution, and then you have a problem, and then there's a solution, and then you have all these problems and solutions. And now all these countries have atomic weaponry, and there's just threats of so it's like,
Right.
and that's cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. I mean, that's on a very massive scale, but that thing happens in our life every single day. Every single day we go through this series of just cause and effect, problems and solutions. And that's what needs to stop, because as long as we get stuck in this cycle of problems and solutions and cause and effects, we're just going to allow for this to occur. And you have to see it for what it is, right? So you got to push past what I said originally, that this thing plays on the ego of an individual, your confusion and your inherent state of insignificance. And you have to find yourself wanting to not be confused in this world. And you have to release your sense of insignificance, right? Find significance in other things. I'm a good, sober father. Right. I'm a good tenant. I'm a good employee. I do my best to get a good community going. I do these podcasts, like I had these little things, that I find significance in. And that's very important to me, but mainly being a sober father to my daughter. And now my children that are back in my life again, because of this, because of being sober, so it's like the restoration aspect of it. That's very significant for me. And then you have to figure out a way or come to something that resonates with you that's going to eliminate your confusion in this world, right? At a philosophical level, at an existential level. And that's where Buddhism comes into play, because it makes a lot of sense of all this stuff, right? So now I'm not confused about what this is. I view this as Mara. I view this as the Lord of Senses. I view this as that catalyst that operates behind the scenes that teaches us to eliminate the ego and to become detached from this world of cause and effect. So, and in that, I've eliminated my confusion. I've eliminated my need for significance or my care for insignificance or either of it. And then you come into a place of contentment and self-contentment within yourself. And that silence.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so many things now on like we brought this up several times because it's this, Parawareness thing that we're starting now. But so many different people are now talking about the huge importance of meditation. Man, meditation is huge right now. Have you noticed that, Kevin? Yeah. And it's because and mindfulness, right. And a lot of these, there's a lot of different lessons, but so I've been working on that too. I'm just starting to get really into studying Buddhism, and I'm just starting to get really into meditation. I'm when I say really into, I'm saying I finally took the plunge and I'm starting now. You know what I mean? Like, I'm taking step one of learning what this actually is, and I'm really excited about it. But
I don't recommend meditation. I mean, I'm talking like and there's a lot of different ways to look at meditation. So I mean, you can just sit and learn how to sit with the stillness of your mind and to be immensely conscious of the present moment. That's and that's a good thing. But when you're hearing voices, meditation, that kind of meditation can be very, very, very stressful and difficult to do, especially if you haven't gotten what the Buddha refers to as the monkey mind down yet, So, the Buddha referred to the mind as having a group of wild monkeys in it that are just constantly bickering and yammering and throwing their feces all over the place and bringing up shit that doesn't matter. And, talking about you and your life and just trying to make you feel like a piece of crap or, whatever. So it's difficult at first to do meditation when the monkey mind is going, or if you're hearing voices that are coming from outside of you, So for me, it was more important to get the mindfulness aspect of it down and to do mantras. More of like transcendental, meditation. Like a lot of mantra work went into my recovery. A lot. I mean, I'm talking like, so the Buddha recommended that people recite mantras like 103 or 106 times. Like a lot. Like people are like, oh yeah, I just say a few things to myself. No. Understand that what these voices do, they talk to you 24/7.
Right.
And 24 while you're sleeping.
Yep.
While you're sleeping, while you're awake, while you're at work, while you're watching Netflix, while you're trying to have time at the park, while you're jogging, 24/7, they're going at it, trying to associate with your subconscious, associate with your ego, and trying to reprogram your psyche.
Right.
You need to go at it 24/7. So you need to come up with some sort of spiritual or philosophical ideology or precepts that truly resonates with you. And that's so important. It must make sense to you, because, me with my doubts and not having a strong conviction with Christianity when I first got in this, they just mocked me.
Yes.
Mocked me, laughed at me, and that is disheartening and just it's crushing, right? But when I started making there's a lot of common sense in Buddhism. There's things that I can read and I go, oh, that makes sense. There's no magic or miracle. Like this is just practical psychological common sense when I read this. And then you start doing mantras based off of that. So you begin, and then you begin doing realistic self-talk, because realistic self-talk is not. And when I say realistic self-talk, I mean self-talk that is based on things that are actually true about your current circumstances and your reality and who the person that you are in the present moment. Not bullshit, not pretentious self-talk, not lying to yourself. It has to be things that are realistic to you. I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I'm not the dumbest. That's a realistic phrase, right?
Yeah.
Because but sitting there and just saying I'm smart. Oh, I'm smart. I'm intelligent. I'm a genius. Like, that ain't gonna work, because it's a lie.
And because so like we've already addressed, so much of this does revolve around the ego, or the
right.
whichever direction your ego is going, whether it's way too low or way too high, whatever, out of balance is what we're saying.
Right.
And so that's a lot of times where mine come in. It's like, I have to use mantras to say, I'm allowed to have an opinion. I'm allowed to be here. I'm allowed to take up space. You know what I mean? Like, I'm allowed to be this thing where for so long I didn't think I could, because there was, I had trauma. I had trauma that somehow convinced me. But yeah, so anyway, the main thing I wanted to make sure, and kind of before we jump off of here, is just I wanted to make sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I wanted to show everybody, and this is just something good. And I actually shared this with the community the other day. So there's an app. It's called Writer Plus, right? So, and this app, if you can see that, it's the W, right? See that W down there?
Yes.
It looks like that, Writer Plus. And if you open that app up, right, it looks like this. All right.
Okay.
Boom. And then, so I would, and I'm going to look at this. This is from the beginning of my journey with this thing, right?
Yeah. Wow.
Look at it. It just keeps going, bro.
Yes.
Right? It just keeps going. So anytime that, write down what the voices are saying, right? Because they're harping on your self-perception. They're harping on things, and a lot of times they speak very rhetorically, like it's very weird, rhetorical statements, but they do have deeper meaning. They do have deeper purpose a lot of times. Write down your mantras. Like, I have a whole thing of just mantras that, depending on the situation, I go through. If I'm reading something, or if I'm listening to something, or if I'm making a Reddit post, I'll copy and paste into that. A lot of responses that I give to people on Reddit are very repetitive. So I have certain phrases and stuff in there, and I'm like, well, this fits for this and this fits for this, just to save myself time from saying the same thing over and over and over again and typing it, taking time away from my family, and, and write down a journal, keep a journal of going every day, so that way you can look back and see the process. This app holds so much, and it'll kind of subcategorize everything for you. And, that's it. It's been a huge help.
That's a great point. And, so I totally am on board. I highly suggest journals. You have to be journaling in some way. I do it video journals. I'll just turn on the camera and just sit down, because I've got my little setup here. I'll just sit down in front of the camera and just start talking, and I'll do journal videos where I talk about what I'm doing. And then I'll have ideas where I'll go, I think I'll talk about this specific topic, and come in with an idea of what I wanted to kind of discuss with myself. But it's very, very helpful. And that's what I want everybody to understand on, from if you're struggling basically in any way, go to Positive TI, it's still going to be there. Just because Parawareness is a thing doesn't mean Positive TI is going away. And there's so many helpful things there. And go look at Kevin. I can say your last name, right?
Oh, I don't care. Yeah.
Yeah. So Kevin Orr, the name of his YouTube channel is Kevin Orr, ORR. Go there and watch all these videos that he's got of all of these, these steps that he's planned out and all of these different ways that he's documented to deal with what so many of us are going through. And I challenge any of you who maybe you're an experiencer or maybe you're not in the TI community is what I'm saying. If you're not in the TI community, please talk to us about this and tell us how you feel like our experience compares and relates to yours, and so we will be starting, we'll have a chat room. We're going to be doing some talking. It's not all set up yet, but we'll let you know what it is. And there's going to be community is what we're trying to build, where we can not just say, I'm a targeted individual and let me go talk with my friends about who's shooting me with laser beams.
Right.
Well, there's a lot more to that in our opinion. And so we want to start exploring this. And one other thing that I wanted to make sure and mention is that if any of you are familiar with schizophrenia or with psychiatry, Kevin does have an upcoming. Do you still have that Marzinski interview?
I do. Yeah. That's not until the end of April though. So about another. Yeah, it's about a month away.
Okay, so yeah, we got about a month, maybe 6 weeks. Okay, I just kind of wanted to mention that Kevin will be interviewing a man named Jerry Marzinski, who's done a lot of work and been on a lot of podcasts, and I've watched hours and hours of his stuff, and it's amazing. I mean, what he talks about with schizophrenia. We don't have to go into it too much, but I just kind of, I don't know. I guess I kind of wanted to touch on this on the upcoming Marzinski interview because I kind of see it as a big deal especially for schizophrenics to me.
Yeah. So, I initially had the moderator for Hearing Voices Network. And this is so weird, right? Actually, this is how this whole thing went down. So, I had already listened to, Dr. Marzinski's, some of his podcasts and things like that. And I really liked, I found it very, helpful, especially coming from a psychiatrist of 35 years, for him to come to some of the realizations that he has come to as far as what schizophrenia is, some of the ways that he is very outspoken about the medication, and what he has come to learn about the way the pharmaceutical companies operate, the way the money operates behind it, insurance companies, and the spiritual aspect behind schizophrenia. And so, which you're not going to hear that. You're not going to hear that from a psychiatrist,
Right.
But after 35 years of dealing with schizophrenia, he's left with very little choice. Like the phenomena or the entities behind schizophrenia made themselves known to him in a way that he went from believing to knowing. And once you make that switch, you can't go back. You can't go back because it's a lie.
That's right.
You can never go back ever again to living that lie. Okay. So, and they exposed himself to him. So, the moderator for Hearing Voices Network, him and I speak frequently, at least a few times a week. And he reached out to me and he said, you would really probably do very well with a podcast with Jerry Marzinski. And the name didn't register, and I was like, all right, whatever, reach out to him if you want. So it was probably like a week later. I was like, oh, that guy. I would love to do a podcast with him. So he had already reached out to him and not heard anything back. So then I reached out to him again, the moderator. And I said, can you please email him again? And he goes, I'll email him again for you. And he did. And he sent me a copy of the email. Nothing. So 4 months went by, and I said, you know what? I'm just going to reach out to him myself. So I wrote out what a targeted individual is, right, and the problem that we're having with the influx of technology. And I actually included that quote by Kant, truth is the agreement of object with, of cognition with its object.
Right.
Right. So, and I made it a very presentable email to him. I would love to have you, to podcast with you. I said, your videos are shown in our community quite often. And the next day he got back to me. Got
Wow.
back to me the next day, and he said, I'm not." He goes, "I've heard of the target individual community." He goes, "But I'm not very familiar with what it is." But I assured him that the way the technology is going, the community has nowhere to go but up. The more that these technologies become more public awareness and general awareness, this this concept or the belief that this is a government enterprise doing this to people is only going to continue to go through the roof. Like it has nowhere to go but up. It has nowhere to go but up. So he agreed to that. So I said, great. And so we got that scheduled in for the end of April. Yeah. So I'm going to have a time on that where I would like to have questions from the community. So probably about a week before I get ready to do the interview, I'll put a post on Reddit and other communities saying I'm getting ready to do an interview with him. What questions do you have for him? Yes. And then I'll do an entire, however long it takes to get through some questions that are very pertinent. So,
and people need to realize, like, this is almost like having an insider, because an insider into the world of psychiatry. And right. I mean, how many people have we heard that are going, my psychiatrist is not letting me do what I want to do? They are right. So it's interesting and helpful, I think, and powerful for us to be able to have this person that we get to now bring into the fold in a way. Right. That's cool.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It'll be interesting. I'll have a whole, outline, really done up properly before I do the interview with him and everything. But I really just want him to talk. Like, I want everybody to hear his story and how he came to know, or find, to know that what he's dealing with is a spiritual entity and not, and how everything that he was taught, because it's difficult. It's difficult for somebody to spend that amount of time, first of all, spend that amount of money to be taught a certain thing. And then once they go into this field, now they're surrounded by colleagues that also are all adhering to this belief that they were spent money on to be taught, and they have, they have credentials now, and they have like all these, accreditations and all, and then to go, this is wrong. Like, whoa, I wasted my money. Like, whoa,
throw it all out the window.
Hold on. Right. So that's like, like, oh my gosh. Yeah. So I want that captured. And I want, and then the experience that led to him coming to that realization and that knowing and that understanding. So I'm looking forward to it.
That's great. Yeah. I want to make sure that, one more time, if you are experiencing anything strange, if you out there watching this video, if you're experiencing anything strange or that seems to be having the signs of schizophrenia or targeted individuals or all these different groups we've mentioned, feel free to look into, like and subscribe, and go to Kevin's channel, Kevin Orr, on YouTube. Like and subscribe to him. Go to PositiveTI. Look at all this stuff and see where you fit in. And then we'll have communities that you can get into. There are already communities out there. If you're a targeted individual or a schizophrenic, whatever, there are communities out there. But we're going to be starting our own Parawareness community as well. And so please, and if you have any questions, we are not medical advice. We are not medical professionals, but we would love for you to put a comment down below and let us know what you think. And hopefully we'll get to talk back to you. So I think this is the first in probably what's going to be many conversations between us on camera. I hope.
Okay. Hopefully. Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. I'm always interested to see where this is going to go. Just take it one day at a time and approach it with the right attitude. Like, this has to be approached with a spirit and an attitude of compassion and empathy and recovery, because of all the things that the targeted individual community needs. Recovery is number one. Recuperation, compassion, because this thing it presents as psychosis. And you have people that are just losing their minds. I mean, absolutely losing their minds, getting ready to attack neighbors, attacking police, recording people on the street that have absolutely no clue why they're being recorded. And it's all the voices manipulating their mind. So we're dealing with a lot of psychological manipulation. We're dealing with a lot of psychosis and a lot of confusion. Again,
Yeah.
ego. It's feeding off of the confusion of an individual, not knowing, not wanting to believe what's happening. Could possibly be happening outside of outside of themselves. Or because one of the steps is we came to understand that our mind is under observation, right? And that step is important because it forces you to start focusing on your mind, right? Because this battle, I guarantee you, I don't even view it as a battle, right? I take a non-dualistic perception towards it, but it can seem like a battle. It seems like a fight. You know what I mean? Like you're fighting for your mind, and then the targeted individual community believes that they're in a fight against the government. They're in a fight against the police. They're in a fight against But this fight is in your mind. This is not a battle that's going to be won on Congress's steps. This is not a battle that's going to be won in a courtroom. This is not a battle that's going to be won with lawyers and prosecutors and judges and witnesses and documents. This is a battle that is won in the mind. All right, and the more of a unified approach that we can have with this battle, this conflict, coming to certain understandings and a more of a harmonious approach we can have, the better.
I couldn't have said it any better. I think that's a perfect place to end it, in a place of really showing what we're here for. We're here to help people, and that's our entire goal. So that's it. Thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate you, man. And thanks for taking the time out.
All right. Thank you so much.